Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. It is 2:14 p.m. This session is set to go until 3 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're in 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. Vice Chair Ty Menser joining us via Zoom, and Commissioner Gary Edwards here to my left. And today we're going to be discussing the 2023 legislative session summary briefing. And we have Deborah Munguia, who's our lobbyist, joining us here today. And a question?
No, just somebody waved and I waved back.
Okay.
That's one of the hazards of being in here.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a social guy, you know, I'm just.
Okay.
So, thank you, Deborah, for joining us this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to hear your perspective, how the past legislative session went, and hopefully at the end, we can start, thinking, brainstorming as to what will be the legislative agenda items for the county next year. There has been a little bit of a conversation among the Board of Health members that perhaps we need to either include Board of Health items as part of the overall Thurston County legislative agenda, or perhaps having a specific Board of Health legislative agenda. So that has been in discussions, and also as I have introduced you to some of the lobbyists with the hospitals. That might be an opportunity to partner in any particular legislative ask they may see appropriate. So that's at the end. But at this point, first of all, thank you for everything you have done this past legislative session. It's not an easy task, and you make it look so easy. So from my humble point of view, thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. I just have to also say thank you to you and to the commissioners and to all the staff here at Thurston County too, because it's definitely a team effort. And so I think with that and with our wonderful delegation too, I think that we did well. But I am looking forward to the discussion at the end also to talk about next session and interim work and things that we need to be doing to prepare for that. So just really quickly, on slide 2, that's sort of the outline of what I want to cover. Overview of the legislature, a quick summary of some of the highlights of the various budgets that they passed. Talk about the county priorities, some additional areas of interest, and then the next steps conversation. So on slide 3, it was a long session. It was a 105-day biennial budget session where the legislature had to approve an operating budget, a capital budget, and a transportation budget. And the operating budget had to balance for 4 years. And Democrats still maintain a very strong majority in both the House and the Senate. On slide 4, on the operating budget, it was a $69.3 billion operating budget. There was some new spending in there, and they left $3 billion in reserves. There was a significant investment in behavioral health, so we'll talk about that a little bit more too. And that includes the Blake bill that they passed during the special session. There's a significant amount of funding there as well. Schools, affordable housing, they had a record amount they spent on affordable housing. When you combine it with what they did in the capital budget, it was over $1 billion. And this was also the first year where they were able to take revenues from the Climate Commitment Act and put it into all the operating, capital, and transportation budgets. On the capital budget, it was a $9 billion capital budget, and there were some significant investments there, again, for behavioral health. And so they put $613 million into the hospital at Western State. So there were some really big ticket items in the capital budget, which really narrowed down what was available. So it's not like it was in the last couple of years where there was a lot of money, there was federal money, that kind of thing. This particular year, the capital budget, they really put big investments in some big ticket items. And they left a little bit for the supplemental. So the supplemental is also going to be very small. But they did fully fund the Public Works Assistance Account, and they ended the diversions for that. So that was good. $400 million for the Housing Trust Fund, $200 million for broadband. They put additional money into the Drinking Water Assistance Account, which I was thinking about during the previous presentation, so wondering if there might be some resources there. And they put over 48 million into culverts and 211 million for behavioral health capacity grants. In the transportation budget, if you'll remember last year, they passed the Move Ahead package, which was a 16-year, $16 billion package. But what they didn't do, which they have done in previous years where they've passed big transportation packages, was they didn't phase those particular projects. And so that was something that, that they needed to do this year. They chose not to bond the money, and so rather than phasing it out over 16 years, they did it over 8 years, recognizing that they're still gonna have some more work to do in terms of how these projects are being delivered by WashDOT. The governor criticized the legislature for putting, in his opinion, putting new projects ahead of maintenance and preservation, and we know that there is a workforce shortage with WashDOT and many other places. And so we'll have to see how it all plays out, but they did have some significant investments in many things like safe roads to school, the state and local culverts, and they did approve the federal fund pilot exchange at a 95-to-1 ratio, and so that was good. One of the problems with the transportation budget is that there is declining revenue from the gas tax. And so they're trying to figure out how they want to bring in more revenue to the transportation budget. They're talking about a road usage charge. There's also a study that was in the transportation budget to do a statewide retail delivery fee. And that's based on what the state of California does, where they charge, it's not very much money, like maybe 22 cents a package or something like that, for having something delivered to your house. And so, and then that money would go in towards maintenance and preservation and things like that. So they're taking a look at that as a potential option for increasing revenue. And it brings in quite a bit of money into the Colorado state transportation budget. So we'll have to see how.
So Colorado and California both do this?
I think it's just Colorado, but it might be that California's looking at it.
I thought you said California earlier.
Did I? I'm sorry, I meant Colorado, the other C.
Okay.
Okay.
Not Connecticut.
So, in terms of the county's legislative priorities, let's see here. Not sure if you have the document, but one of the things that was very important to the county was to maintain your judicial reimbursement, something that we fought very, very hard for a few years ago. That that is still in the budget, still at the same level, 2.188 million a biennium. And so, and the proviso language is still in the budget, which is important, especially because the proviso language says that it's the intent of the legislature to make that ongoing. So that can sometimes get lost over the years and built into the maintenance level of an agency budget. So we can talk about that and whether or not you want to have any attempts at increasing that over the years. Another big issue that the county was dealing with was the sexually violent predators LRA placement. And I'm sure you've seen all of the press statements and the things that have gone on around that. I know there's been some dialogue. And we have been talking with several legislators. We had meetings throughout the legislative session. And we know that this is an important issue for legislators as well. So we expect that to be something we deal with.
Maybe just a quick follow-up on that. We wrote a letter to the
Sex offender
Sex
policy board.
Offender Policy Board. Are you aware of all this already?
Yes.
That they sent the letter, they sent us a return and said, sorry, you didn't get it in time to be
Yeah,
considered.
Yeah, I have an opinion as to why, because the intent of the letter is to bring awareness before they finalize the report. And the report is not finalized. So we asked for a public records to give us a copy of the draft.
Yeah, but I mean, I just want you to know that there's resistance coming out of the state that you should know about. And I think our legislative officials that have been helping us on that topic should be made aware of that with a copy of the letter that we sent.
They have the letter. I shared all the letters. with
And,
you.
but a copy of the letter that we received back.
Yeah, I'll share those.
so
Pretty
that they
simple.
know we're being slow walked by a bunch of bureaucrats.
And of course, there was a proviso that was put into the budget by Representative Stokesbury, who is now the House Minority Leader, about giving local communities more notice, and that was vetoed in the final budget.
Speaking of the letters, the letter from John Dunheim, you got a copy, that is specific as a potential changes to the law coming up next session. So maybe we can start working on that.
Okay. And we have meetings coming up with legislators as well that want to work on this. So another priority for the county was supporting House Bill 1022, which would have created separate levies for veterans and for mental health and developmental disabilities. That made it through two committees and into House Rules, and it died in House Rules. And so all of the bills that died last session will be reintroduced next session. So it technically will be alive next session. However, this is probably one of the things that we should talk about in terms of interim work, because there really needs to be some discussion and education with some of the veteran services organizations, and that we need their support. This is something that we're going to get over the finish line. ITA funding, it doesn't look like the legislature approved the $9 million that the Healthcare Authority was looking for Superior Court costs, but we can talk about that too. The county also asked for some money for the elections building through the capital budget. That was one of the things that they said no to a lot of things. That was one of the things that they said no to, unfortunately. They did provide some money to the Southwest Ag Park. They requested $2 million, they received $1.25 million. That's a regional project. There's already been some state money that's gone into that project. So I think that that's probably why that one was successful in getting some funding. There was a priority for the Deschutes Watershed Council. That was not funded in the operating budget. I looked at previous appropriations for other watershed councils, and the money that was provided to them was really for implementation kinds of things, like doing studies and things like that, not for administrative costs. And so if that's something that we want to continue to work on, we should be talking about that as well. County also supported the local park system request of $5 million. There was a one-time $5 million operating budget item for local parks. And I just sent you an email earlier today. That application cycle is now open. So, and I believe the maximum grant amount is $100,000. And I think
We're on it.
Okay, and when the money runs out, I think they're gonna kind of wait and see, if they're gonna do this again. It will also depend on the state of the state's revenues. And then, of course, there were a couple of county-specific bills that were important. The county district boundaries and then the salary commission bills. Those were both successful and have been signed. And then there was another bill that the county opposed, it was 1705, and then the companion was 5645, and that was the stormwater facilities bill, which would have allowed a diking or drainage district that operated storms if they entered into an agreement. So we continue to oppose that, and we will continue discussions during the interim with the prime sponsors of that legislation to help them understand why.
Did that pass? No.
But it will be back. It will be alive again next session technically. So we have more work there. I'm gonna just quickly go over this because I do want to make sure that we spend some time talking about next steps. But one of the big things that happened this last session, there was a lot of bills on housing. In addition to the record amount of funding that went into housing, there were a lot of policy bills on housing. One of the big ones that really only affected cities, not counties, was middle housing. However, when the Senate companion bill, which was Senate Bill 5190, was in the Senate Housing Committee, Senator Braun, who is the Senate Minority Leader, introduced an amendment that would have brought counties into it as well.
What?
It would have brought counties into the middle housing bill as well, which is basically, it creates more density on all lots. And so I would not be surprised if that comes back, either next session or the following session. The middle housing bill, of course, Representative Bateman was the one that was the prime sponsor of that last year and this year. And she really did a lot of work, along with other folks. She did a lot of work with the cities on that. And so I think that probably if the counties are going to be brought into that discussion, it's probably going to be something that WASAC's going to be very engaged in. There were ADU bills that passed that have a whole laundry list of things that you have to allow for people in order to do ADUs. There's some other bills that did not pass. One of them was Representative Barkas's bill around lot splitting, and I expect that one to be back next session. So I think there's going to continue to be a lot of work on housing issues over the next year or two.
The first one, the one you said just before this Barkus bill, I think.
ADUs?
Yeah, the ADU, were some of those issues in rural America or unincorporated like UGAs or what, do you remember where those
It's
might fall?
ADUs within UGAs.
In UGAs,
Yes.
okay.
And hopefully everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would think the same thing for the middle housing you're talking about within UGAs.
Right, because we wouldn't go, I don't think the bill was intended to go into the rural areas because that would be contrary to GMA.
Right. I'm just making sure.
But they might adjust that.
Absolutely, and
changes.
you know, if counties are brought into it, I think it would be a good opportunity to revisit GMA. Kind of worms.
Obviously, they spent a lot of time on Blake, and as I mentioned earlier, they did pass that during the special session, and I think everybody's familiar with what they did with Blake. One of the issues that has come up recently is what are the implementation dates? Because they're different for bills that pass in special session, and is it July 1st, like it says in the bill in some areas, and so I think that some of the guidance around that has been look at mid-August in terms of what you want to do around Blake. But one of the big issues with Blake, so it really focuses on treatment, but I think it's pretty clear that there needs to be more funding for local governments, for cities and counties in terms of being able to provide that treatment. And so I think that is going to be a very big priority over the next year and subsequent years in terms of what the legislature is looking at in terms of providing additional funding for that. Public safety was another big issue that the legislature dealt with. There were firearm bills, assault weapon bans, vehicular pursuits. That was modified, and so we'll have to see how that works. I'm sure that the Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs will be continuing to provide information on whether or not the new vehicular pursuit bills, which limits them to certain kinds of crimes, is going to be effective for local governments. And then there were a lot of climate bills that passed as well. So I'll pause there, see if there's any questions.
Yes.
And then,
I'm raising my hand.
Okay. Commissioner Edwards, and then we'll get Commissioner Munster.
Okay. Was there anything that came from reference GMA about the Reckel House study? Did that ever go anywhere or do anything? The Association of Counties was kind of wrapping, pushing on that.
my understanding is that didn't really go anywhere. I mean, I think they took some of that information and then they used it, but I know that are you referring to like a specific policy piece of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like, how are we gonna adjust the Growth Management Act a little bit,
Well, they did make some changes to the Growth Management Act. House Bill 1181, which was the one that created a new goal in the GMA around climate change, is probably one of the biggest ones that will impact counties. And I know that WASAC did a webinar with Department of Commerce to talk about counties. Thurston County is one of them that have to meet a lot of the elements in that. And so I'm not a growth management expert, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, what some of those are. But I know that the county has access to that webinar, and hopefully the planners are.
Any more discussion on qualified immunity for law enforcement? Did that come up at all?
Help me understand what you mean.
Well, when they eliminated qualified immunity to the individual officers, used to be in, you know, if you did something in good faith, reasonable suspicion, whatever it was, whatever the barometer was. But then you did have qualified immunity, but they eliminated that. And because of that, officers are not willing to take any chances because they no longer have that qualified immunity that the municipality they might work for would normally be taken care of for them. It's gone. So they make a arrest, but that it looks too violent, or, you know, no arrest where there's a resist looks pretty. You know, and now with all these cell phones and stuff around, you know, pretty soon you're in a trial situation and you could lose your house. Because if you don't have that qualified immunity, you'd have no protections. So it's a big deal to law enforcement and getting law enforcement back to doing their job. So even if they hire all the law enforcement officers back, they're not gonna do their job until qualified immunity comes back. And the society will understand that down the road a few years, but I just wondered if that's on the radar.
I don't recall that being a big issue of discussion, this last session. I mean, there was bills around prejudgment interest and things like that. But I'll go back and I'll look at that and I'll do some research and I'll see if that's something that might be
Yeah,
good.
because I don't remember the qualified immunity being taken out. I think it
From
was
a
a
couple
part of a
years ago.
conversation, so I don't recall that actually passed.
It popped up in 22, but I don't think it popped
But-
up in 23.
Yeah, but I don't think it passed and limited the qualified immunity. You think it passed? Oh,
Let me go
okay.
back and look
Okay,
and
well,
I'll follow
okay.
up.
I was not tracking on that, but
You know, I could be wrong. Maybe the people I was talking to were so wrapped up in it that maybe.
but I
the-
know there was some conversations last legislative session. I don't recall being part of the conversation this session, but
And the other piece of the liability one was for the counties for, you know, they're 1% at fault and they get stuck with the whole load.
Joint and several.
Anything on that at all?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Joint
And several
Yeah, so-
liability.
Oh, yeah, that continues to be something that comes up every year. It was something that was being discussed again this year. It did not pass, but expected to be back again.
yeah. Yeah, that bill-
It's never, if we
Isn't
get
that
rid of the
the-
lawyers up there, it would. That's what Deborah wants to hear.
Did Commissioner Mensah have a question too?
Commissioner Mejia, step out of the room. Commissioner Messer, have any questions?
Questions? I don't think so.
Okay.
That all sounds right. I mean, I have a meeting on Monday, I believe, with Deschutes Watershed Council advocates, so I'm not sure what to tell them. I guess I'll just listen to what their ideas are. I heard what you said about groups getting more money for projects, not administration costs, but I don't know if Commissioner Edwards is on the Nisqually River Council. I mean, who pays for all of that? To get it.
The tribe gets a lot of money from the state, and from ecology. They're kind of the main player, if you will. My concern with that Deschutes River activity is we tried to get an analysis of the upper Deschutes when they were talking about what's the problems for Capitol Lake, and they denied looking into the upper Deschutes and what that's all about. Corporate America does helicopter seeding on you know, their forest lands, and they dump urea 46 by the ton all over that property. So you might have heard part of our water talk here. Well, they don't penalize corporate America. It gets right in the river, right in the streams, washes down the river. They don't do anything about it. But the little guy, they get him for, you know, lawn fertilizer, which I'm not saying is good. It's bad. So, but they weren't willing to fund anything to look into that. They just didn't want to know the answers, the bottom line. And you probably ought to know that.
The Watershed Council would be somewhere for you to take that complaint, Commissioner. It had nothing to do with the group you're talking about that did the EIS. This would be a community-based
Oh, yeah.
council.
No, I'll be bringing that up, but I'm just saying from a funding perspective on the Deschutes watershed Deborah brought up.
I'm Commissioner. Mensah.
I don't have any more questions. I'm ready to talk about the future stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so, we know there's gonna be some changes next session. It was just announced that, Senator Rolfus was appointed to the Kitsap County Commissioners. And she has said that if she was appointed, that, she would not run, she would not stay in the Senate, and that she would seek, election to the county commissioner position. And she would not run for lands commissioner, which was something that she was exploring, a few years ago. We know that Representative Wilcox, and who is was the House Minority Leader, stepped down from that leadership role. I saw a Facebook post that looks like he's probably not going to be in the legislature either, maybe going into consulting. And Representative Kretz, who was the Deputy Minority Leader, also stepped down from his leadership role. So Drew Stokesbury is the new House Minority Leader, and Mike Steele is the new Deputy. And Rep. Abarno is, Mike Steele was the ranking on capital budget. Rep. Abarno is now the ranking on capital budget. So that's good. So we know that there's gonna be some changes. And then, of course, Wasac has announced a leadership change there, that Eric Johnson will be retiring next year. So there's gonna be some changes there too. In the meantime, we should be talking with our delegation about things that are important to the county, and whether it be something in the capital budget or in the operating budget or a policy issue. And we've already got some meetings set up, but definitely want to think about and talk about what some of the other priorities are, and have those discussions sooner rather than later, so that we can build support for our position on different things. And then work on developing the 24 legislative agenda. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
I've got, but I want Commissioner Menser, he needs to get in.
Commissioner Menser, go first.
Go first.
About next year's session?
Yeah.
Just, what are we brainstorming ideas for priorities? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, just run ideas, and we'll have further conversation based on the ideas that we receive, just to give a little more substance later on, but.
Okay.
Just for Deb to have.
Well, okay, so I would like to see, to the extent that the Board of Health, I would like to see a separate agenda for the Board of Health, not incorporated in the county commissioners. And the ITA issue, I still think is valid to talk about, but that would be a good one for the Board of Health. For the county, the ones that come to mind, just right off the top of my head, I would like to see something in there where we request that pre-World War II state managed forests are taken off the harvest inventory for DNR, and any corresponding revenue gaps be filled through some other funding mechanism. Number two, that I think the time has come to advocate for the Capitol Lake Deschutes estuary. We haven't done that in the past, and I haven't pushed it because there were so many other people doing it, and DES was like right in the middle of being involved in it. I didn't really think that we had to, use one of our chips on that. But since we got, like a third of the funding we asked for, and this thing needs to push forward, it may be time for us to actually specifically make sure that the state pushes that forward. And then the third one was that idea that we had, we all liked it last year, but it was too late, was to work on a tax on luxury pet items that would help fund animal services systems. And since Commissioner Edwards was talking about the need for a new facility, I mean, whether it's response or, capital needs for just humane, facilities for animals, we don't have the funding to manage the animal system. And that was a solution that I hadn't heard anybody objecting to that I've talked to about it. So it's just a matter of developing the proposal and talking to legislators about it. Those are three.
On that note, I did talk with Councilmember Parsley about that, and she had a little bit of information. And there's also a fur fighters caucus within the legislature, where there is a growing bipartisan group of legislators in both the House and the Senate that are working on issues to help with animals. And so that might be something that they would like to. I'm sure we could find somebody
like
that brought
the
that.
fur
Yes,
fighters.
yes.
That's Okay, Commissioner Edwards.
Well, I don't want to hog all the time.
Go ahead.
From a emergency response perspective, our emergency medical system that we operate here in Thurston County. So we just lost our brain trauma unit up at St. Pete's. It closed down. So now when we've got a citizen that has an injury that would require their services, they need to be transported out of state, out of the county, up to Tacoma or Seattle. When that happens, it takes that emergency vehicle and the staff on that emergency vehicle, the ambulances, out of service for the rest of our community. So in some of your interaction with those hospital lobbyists that you'll be working with, maybe that'll fit. This actually fits with what Commissioner Menzer said about the health department and the county, because it really is a dual role activity. And one of the things we need to be aware of is we've got beds full of, and when I say beds full of, last time I talked to the hospital folks, I think there was 45 beds occupied at the hospital by individuals that could easily be released to a lesser care, but they don't have anywhere to go to that lesser care, and they can't just put them on the street, and maybe they are even homeless. So what can we do about maybe zoning, making it easier to build senior care units or something? A lot of people have businesses where they have 5 or 6 people, seniors or challenged folks that live in this house. Mostly DSHS, I think, is covering a lot of that, but some private money goes into that. I think we need to start looking at what are the alternatives so that we can have our bed spaces in our hospitals freed up to deal with our emergency room admittance problem. Because if you get to the emergency room at the wrong time, you're gonna sit there for a long time. I mean, I think they'll stop the bleeding, but you're not gonna get much treatment until they're kind of triaging everything. You know, if you're the bad one, okay, we're gonna take care of you, but you got a bone poking out of your leg, you might lay there for a while. So it's becoming a bigger issue that just hasn't it has not hit the headlines yet. The brain trauma unit that's brand new, getting canceled. Now, why, I don't know exactly why. The doctors could make more money to the north. I don't know. I'm not placing blame on anybody. I'm just saying, we had one of the premier units here in Thurston County, and now it's gone. So however that can fit in some legislative, I think the closest thing I can think of is a care business being allowed, to take care of these folks. And I don't know, maybe even some kind of funding mechanism to help people, low interest loan, small business loan, I don't know, something. I'm sure it's a national problem.
Nobody ever got back to me because Joe Avalos from BHO, and I think someone at the county was going to get back to me on what the legislature actually did with respect to Medicaid rates, but I don't think it applied to long-term care, because I met with folks, they're ready to open facilities if they can just get a little more money to make it pencil out.
Yeah.
So it's,
Capital Medical Center owns me some information because the information that I got from the executive was that Medicaid rates increased significantly. But I don't know what rates.
Yeah, so you don't know.
yeah, but there's different kinds of
Yeah,
rates.
I don't know. So I need to follow up with him. Yeah.
But yeah, that was on my list, but since we're gonna have a separate one, I'm guessing that's for Board of Health.
Yeah, for sure.
Because for Board of Health, I have one that I'm tracking too, which is, and it was passed, it's a bill that got passed in Tennessee this year, where it has to do with a lot of our doctors, where they have streamlined the process for foreign medical doctors, instead of having to do the routine route of doing the 3 tests and then after that going back into the residency program. Now, in order to get through the shortage of medical doctors that Tennessee was facing, they did a process where now they only have to do 2 years under the supervision of a medical licensed doctor here in the US in order for them to get their medical license. And that's something that we're seeing a lot of shortage of medical staff in Washington State. And I would love to see something like that established here. So that's one of the things that I pinned on that Tennessee did. For me, a lot of things mentioned, but one thing that I was speaking with the sheriff about was the police academy backlog that is currently being faced of a year out is what I think the last report he gave us. It's taken a year to get someone through, to get someone into the academy, and there is interest, but just those academy backlogs are really having an effect. And so I know that they're going to be working on something, but just for us, I think to just have on our radar is good, especially as we have those conversations.
The legislature did fund additional BLEA classes from 20 to 23, but it was one time.
Yeah.
So.
So just that continuing funding, I think they're looking for expansion and not
Yeah,
sure.
it is the facility and the trainers is the issue.
Yeah.
They expanded the facility and bring in more trainers.
You know, one thing that we did years ago that we pushed and never got there, obviously, but the State Patrol runs a whole separate academy that's quite extensive. And, you know, they'll have their own problems right now because they're in a hiring situation. But over at Shelton, they've got a great facility over there. And they've never been receptive about allowing other officers to participate. They're kind of this exclusive group, you know. And I think it's stupid, but anyway.
You mean the State Patrol Academy up in,
Shelton.
yeah,
Yeah, they run their own thing.
right.
And cops are cops to citizens out there. I mean, they couldn't tell you if it was a state trooper, city cop, or county deputy, or park ranger to talk to them about an issue. And the state just doesn't get it. They're very protective of their own identity, which I think is detrimental to the citizens of the state, because we have to pay for more diverse, you know, trainings, remote training situations, I guess. So anyway, just something to be aware of.
Monica Alexander used to be with State Patrol, and now she's the head of the Criminal Justice Training Commission. So I would imagine she'd be very aware of that, and
She
would
might
probably
know about it, yeah.
be happy to talk about it.
I know one thing that Ramiro brought up, given that the board will be changing a composition next year, is needing to get some flexibility relative to the composition of the Board of Health. Because that'll mean a fairly large expansion even again, if we're not able to sort of maintain.
Commissioner Mansfield?
Well, thank you, Rob. I knew that there was something that had come up recently and I just couldn't think of it. I think that's it. So yeah, I strongly support trying to do that, because I think our Board of Health is doing it good, and I don't think it's going to be any better by bringing in, you know, 8 more people or whatever it is. So I would like to see that. I think it was an oversight, frankly. You know, I mean, I don't know that it would even be controversial, but it's going to affect us next year directly if that interpretation holds, that we have to include all 5 county commissioners, add 2 more citizens, and that's going to take us to 12.
Similar to the Salary Commission legislation, Deborah, I think it's going to be very, in a way, simple, because the only county who might be affected by this is Thurston County.
And what about Spokane?
Spokane County have a different, they don't have a Board of Health, they have a regional health
Authority
Authority.
or whatever.
So that's different. So in reality, it's only Thurston County that may be affected by the 5 commissioner
Okay,
representation.
okay. Yeah, if we could get something started early, I think that would get it introduced before session starts. That would be pre-filed.
I know there's other stuff, but I just, for some reason, I can't think of it right now.
Yeah.
Going back to the missing middle legislation, be curious what the board's thoughts are relative to the application of some of those ideas to the UGAs. And would you be supportive of that if legislation came back to actually incorporate some of that additional density? In the
I am
UGAs?
personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was in tune with what Barkus had been pushing. I think that did not pass or something.
Well, he was helping Representative Bateman with House Bill 1110, which did pass.
Yeah, but there was something else he was working on. I thought that didn't get through.
Lot splitting, I think.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
45.
Because sometimes, when zoning was put into place, you might have a housing development that's 1/4 acre lots.
Mhm.
And right across the street, it's 5 acre lots, and if you really want to talk about density issues, why not have a splitting deal, because you're still meeting the intent of the Growth Management Act and creating more housing. And that's why I'm pushing on this testing on the water end of it, that we always test in those densely populated areas. Because we're finding down in Rochester, Grand Mountain area, that the nitrate level is going down with on-site septic systems, as long as they're maintained right. That's the key. So.
So
Yeah, I don't, just to answer your question, Rob, I don't have I haven't studied it in any detail, but superficially, I don't see why, if it's going to be imposed across the cities, you wouldn't, it wouldn't be appropriate in the UGA. So,
It's just ultimately one of those issues that, as TRPC did the buildable lands report and that analysis, and as we're moving forward with the comp plan, it can change the numbers piece of it.
I think the holdup with the UGA's middle housing is the septic system, since, most areas in the UGAs are not connected to.
Well, that's why I mentioned that it's going down in South County. The nitrate level is going down. That's in concentrated building areas where there used to be farm activity. And that's what's going on out at the one he mentioned out off of Bald Hill Road or something like that. That's from farm activity. So we always think that farm activity is so clean and housing is so not. It's actually opposite to that if your on-site septic systems are working and all that. So the farm, and especially corporate farm and corporate activity, they get all the breaks. And in the process, they contaminate our environment.
One thing that I just set off that was on my priority list, but this is when we were starting to do the study, and it's the meat processing plant. And so I guess I'll ask for an update on that. And is that something that we can start working on to add onto our legislative agenda?
the study should be completed in July. And at that point will
Perfect.
be an opportunity for the board to weigh in what potential location. So we can dive down a little more in detail, and that will be hopefully a capital request for next year for the
Yeah.
legislature.
Is this part of the Tenino Ag Park?
No.
We
this
are
is-
participating with the Pierce County on a meat processing plan study. And right now, I think they have gone through on the region to determine maybe 4 or 5 potential locations on a swath. I mean, not specific parcels.
It's
But,
so
that
the
might be a
farmer doesn't have to he doesn't have to go all the way to Sunnyside or, to slaughter.
I think what would be helpful is if we got some meetings set up with our delegation. We have several members of our delegation that are very interested in the housing issue and can talk with them about the kind of support but concerns around certain areas, so that if they're thinking about introducing legislation or taking the companion bill that didn't pass, and modifying that to make changes to it, that they understand where the county's position is on that, and it might help influence, anything that happens there. And then, if we have information on the meat processing plant, we can, incorporate that into some of those. But getting the meetings on the books and then talking with them about those issues, about the stormwater issue, about, the SVP LRA issue, things like that would be really helpful. So if I could work with you and your staff, and we could think about when we want
We're
these
just
meetings.
putting a little more substance to those items for sure.
Yeah,
And also, I believe there is a desire for the board to go back to when we have our legislative breakfast, when we have the opportunity to bring the legislative delegation and present the legislative agenda maybe in December. Hopefully we can start working the logistics of that as well.
and if it's, if we can just start setting some informal meetings maybe around September.
Right.
And so that they so when December comes, they're not surprised
Right.
and have a lot of questions because they've already been engaged in the conversation. I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, any additional questions?
Got you right on time.
Okay, 3 p.m. We are adjourned. Thank you so much, Deborah.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.